Gemara. Okay, I guess good morning. Thank you everyone for joining from close, from far. We are holding here in the Gemara in Mesechta Megillah Daf Tes Zayin Amud Beis 16b. Good morning. Good morning of label.
Good morning.
Today you're from close.
Yep. Well, not from a car. I'd be even closer.
I think you sound more clear because you're speaking from closer.
Yeah.
So we're holding here in the Gemara Daf Tezayin Amud Beis 16b. Although it's not directly part of the Purim story, it's still very connected with the Gemara. All about the story of Yosef and his brothers. So we touched upon that Yosef wept on his brother Binyamin's neck when they met him after many years, because he knew with Ruach HaKodesh, with prophecy, that there will be a Beis HaMikdash, the Beis HaMikdash, which will be in Binyamin's portion, will be destroyed, as well as the Mishkan tabernacle, which will be in Yosef's portion, will also be destroyed. And they wept on the other one's destruction. Obviously, for their own destruction, they did not cry, because their own destruction, it's a time for a person to reflect and to see how they could start rebuilding their own Beis HaMikdash. Then Yosef told them, "You see, I'm speaking to you in the Hebrew tongue without an interpreter. And just like I am not upset at my brother Binyamin for selling me, because Binyamin was not part of the brothers who sold Yosef. So just like I am not upset at Binyamin, so too, I am not upset at you." And he told them several times, Hashem arranged it, Hashem did it, because he wants me to help the rest of the Jewish people, rest of the nation, to save you when you came to a time of hunger. The pasuk in Chumash Bereishis, we said that it's all connected to the idea of Purim, the whole story and the conversation between Mordechai and the rest of the Jewish people. Mordechai was a descendant from Binyamin, from King Shaul. So Mordechai had to have extra powers, extra strength. His brother Yosef gave him lots of extra clothes, just like Yaakov gave Yosef an extra garment. It did not cause jealousy. He's saying that he is something very special, because in the future, Binyamin, descendant, Mordechai, he will be walking in front of the king of Achashverosh with 5 royal garments. After Yosef revealed himself to his brothers, and he cried on Binyamin's neck, he says, and he kissed all of his brothers, and he wept over them. Tezayin, and a rumor went out in Paro's house, saying, Joseph's brothers have come. Paro and his servants were very happy. Now they knew Yosef wasn't just a slave without knowing his pedigree. Now they knew he came from the family of Avram and Yitzchok and Yaakov. They're very happy. Now you see Yosef is a very worthy person to be a viceroy, second in command to the king. By Yomer Paro, Paro said to Yosef, why should your parents and your family stay in the land of Canaan and suffer over there from the hunger? Let them come over here to Egypt. The etna lechem, and I will give to you kol tuv Eretz Canaan. All the good, kol tuv Eretz Mitzrayim, everything good in the land of Egypt. Everything they could possibly want, I will give to them. And then take your father and his family, bring them all to Egypt. And that's what Yosef did. And Yosef sent off his brothers. He told them, Al tirgazu badarach, don't argue on the way, don't argue about Torah learning, don't argue about who is responsible for selling Yosef. But Yosef sent a present to his father. And it wasn't just a regular present. There was a lot of meaning and a lot of depth to this present. So he gave to his brothers one change of clothes. To Binyamin, he gave 300 pieces of silver, 5 changes of clothes. Ulaviv, and to his father Yaakov, he sent the following with his brothers: Asara chamayrim, 10 donkeys, noisim mituv Mitzrayim, carrying all the best that Egypt had to offer. And the Gemara will explain what Egypt had to offer. And then ve'eser asoinos, and 10 female donkeys, noisos bar v'lechem u'mazayin la'aviv l'derech, carrying grain, bread, and other types of food for his father on the way. So the Gemara will now explain all the different details of this present of Yosef to his father Yaakov. Says the Gemara, Ulaviv shalach, and to his father he sent. This is the 5th to last narrow line, so it'll be probably 16b2. His father Yosef sent 10 donkeys, noisim mituv Mitzrayim, carrying all the good that Egypt had to offer. Ask the Gemara, my mituv Mitzrayim, what type of good things did Egypt offer? Why did the pasuk, the Torah, only say it was good without saying specifically what it is? Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yamin bar Yefes, Amar Rabbi Lazar, says Rabbi Yamin bar Yefes in the name of Rabbi Lazar, Shalach lo yayin yashan. Yosef sent to his father aged wine. Rashi takes out the word aged. So according to Rashi, it was not necessarily aged wine, just a different type of wine. Shadas Zkainim noicha himenu, which the elderly people find pleasing. Now, when somebody gets older, they lose their natural body warmth that they have. You know, they feel colder all the time. They don't need so much heating, air conditioning in the summer, or they go to warmer weathers. And wine warms up the person. And so Yosef sent to his father a very good wine that everybody enjoys, especially the older people, because they like to warm themselves up. So it wasn't saying that the wine was good by itself, but it was good because it could warm up Yaakov. That's how Rashi explains what type of wine was sent by Yosef to his father Yaakov. The Shalah, Rabbi Shaya Levi Horowitz, buried in Tiferes, right next to the Rambam. So he explains he was a very big Mekubal, a lot of Kabbalah, and he explains about the wine, a secret of the wine that Yaakov was sent by his son Yosef. He said there's 2 types of wine in general. There's a positive type of wine and a negative type of wine. Wine could be used in a very good thing, very positive sense. For example, when Hashem created the world, he created with it what's called the Yayin HaMeshumer, the wine which will be put into storage, to guarding. Wine which will sit around until the time of Mashiach, and then Hashem will serve it at a big feast that we're going to have right when Mashiach comes, together with the Levyasan, the fish, which was made by creation, and the Shahar Bar, a large ox. So this type of wine is a very special wine, and it's the wine which is set aside for Olam Haba. And Das Zkainim, it says elderly people enjoy the wine. In Kabbalah, we learned this in Derech Mitzvah, it says the level of Atik is called, Atik means old, level of Atik of Chachma is Atik Yomin, a man of old age, who is sitting with white hair and white beard. So Atika Kadisha, level of Atik, that is considered to be the wine which will have a Mashiach, is beneficial for the old people for the level of Atik to reveal when Mashiach comes. And then he explains, there's another type of wine which is a not good wine. Wine which is drunk and people become drunk off it, the wine which Noach drank or the Lot drank, that could be a very negative experience with wine. It says that after Adam, he ate from the tree of knowledge. According to one opinion, it was wine. He had to separate from his wife for 130 years. When he turned 130, he remarried Chava, like he got back together in Chava. It was straight out in the Torah. And then they had another child named Shes. They had 2 children born on the first day. Adam wanted to do teshuvah. He separated from his wife. And at the age of 130, he reunited with his wife. So 130 in Hebrew is kuf lamed, which means kal, lightheaded, which it says nashim daitin kalas, a woman can have become lightheaded. The idea of wine is when somebody loses their feeling and their attention. The Jews were in Egypt for 130 years before Moshe Rabbeinu was born. Also the same idea, kuf lamed, 130. That's the idea of also negativity. Yocheved was born when they entered Egypt, as they're entering the country. And Moshe Rabbeinu was 80 when he redeemed the Jews, altogether 210 years. So Yocheved gave birth 130 at the age of 130. She gave birth to Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe Rabbeinu, when he redeemed the Jews, he was fulfilling a prophecy that was given to Avram Avinu. So the idea of taking wine and making the old people feeling warm with it, feeling good with it, is that we want to have a positive type of wine. The wine which is yayin meshumar, the wine which is guarded for the time of Mashiach, but not the type of wine which is kal. So Yosef is hinting to his brothers, I'm sending Yaakov old wine. Meaning, there's going to be altogether, the matching of the word yayin yashan is 430, saying that when Jewish people will be redeemed, it will be in a very positive way at the end of 430 years.
Was there any problem with the wine being goyish wine?
This was, I think, before the decree on goyish wine.
Okay.
The decree on goyish wine was made after the story with, the Jews sinned with the Moabite daughters. And that was as a result of the Jews drinking the wine from the Moabite wine. So after that, meaning in the 40th year that the Jews were in Egypt, that's when the decree against drinking Gentile wine was established. But so at that point, they were still allowed to drink non-kosher wine. Now, the Ben Ish Chai, he adds on this, my grandmother, she had an old saying that she had growing up when she was growing up in Russia. It says, a fool doesn't become old and water can't become sour. The two of them together. So she would meet somebody which, she felt that they were a little foolish. She would say, water doesn't become spoiled and a fool doesn't become old. So somebody says, a Talmid Chacham, the older they get, what? You should say in Yiddish. Yeah, so it says a Talmid Chacham. Gemara says Zikni Talmid Chachamim. The older Torah scholar becomes Daitoi Misyasheves. His mind becomes better and sharper. And Zikni Amei Eretz, and those who don't learning Torah, the older they become, so then their mind becomes weaker and become more foolish. So yayin, the wine, is used a lot of times to comfort a person. It says when a mourner comes home, you have to says tznu yayin lamari nefesh. You give them a meal of wine, Give wine to those people who are sad and depressed. Altogether, he wanted to say, Yosef is sending a message to his father Yaakov, and he kept telling him, don't worry about the fact that you're going to Egypt. You should know that although it was decreed to Avram Avinu that you'll be in exile for 430 years, but don't worry about it. The 430 years already started in the past, and there's nothing to worry about. You're going to be redeemed from Mitzrayim, from Egypt, a lot sooner than the allotted 430 years. So the word yayin yashan, old wine, has a gematria of 430, and he's saying you don't have to worry about it. You'll be redeemed much sooner. Let's continue the Gemara. The Gemara continues now, saying the next part of what happened after the whole story, after Yaakov came down to Egypt, and Yaakov passed away. Yaakov gave blessings to his sons. And after Yaakov passed away, it says, Yosef sent his brothers to Eretz Yisrael to bury his father. And after the brothers returned to Egypt, and they saw that Yosef stopped being so friendly and so kind and warm to them, and thought perhaps now, as long as our father was alive, Yosef was being kind to us. Now that he died, Yosef wants to get revenge for the fact that we sold him. So it says over here in verse 18, Vayelchu gam echav, and his brothers went to Yosef, Vayiplu lefanav, and they fell in front of him, Vayomeru, and they told him, Hinenu lecha la'avadim. Behold, here we are your slaves. Yosef answered them back, Yomer leim Yosef, al tiro, don't be scared. I don't want to get revenge on you. Don't be scared that you have to appease me. Am I in the place of Hashem? Do I have power like Hashem had? The atem chashaftem alai ra'a. You meant to do evil against me. Elikim chashava l'toiva. And Hashem took that very thought that you had to do something negative to me, and he switched it that it should be positive. L'ma'an asoi kayom hazeh l'hachayos rav. In order to do like it's clear today, that you should be alive, and many of you should survive and thrive in Egypt. Says the Gemara explaining this, Amar Rabbi Binyamin bar Yefes, another statement from Rabbi Binyamin, in the son of Yefes. Amar Rabbi Elazar says in the name of Rabbi Elazar, Hainu da'amri inshi. This explains the common saying that people in general would say, Tala be'idnei sagidlei. Tala means a fox. Idne means at the time. Sagidlei should bow down to him. Usually, when it comes to the animal kingdom, the king of the animals is the lion. So all the animals bow to the lion. However, if let's say a fox, for some reason, is being very successful at that time, so it says all the animals should bow down to the fox because of his being successful. It's a sign that Hashem is making him successful at that time, and everyone should, at that time, give respect and bow down to the fox. So it's a saying that if somebody's having a lot of success, even if they're morally, or even if they're, not on a much lower, they really are on a much lower rung than you, you should subjugate, you should be respectful to them, bow to them. And so the brothers of Yosef, even though they were older than him, and they were perhaps wiser than him, but they would bow down to Yosef, even though he was younger than them, because he was the king, he was the one in power. Says the Gemara, Tala, why are you considering Yosef to be a fox? Meaning Yosef is in a lower rung by the brothers. Mai b'tzirusei me'achva. In what sense? How do you know that Yosef was inferior to his brothers? you're taking it as granted that Yosef was not as great as his brothers. If you want to talk about that he's younger than them, he was only 7 years younger. What's 7 years after all, right? Especially Binyamin was even younger than Yosef. So Yosef should not be considered to be inferior if you're going by age than Binyamin. And also Yosef was a son of Rachel, Yaakov's favorite wife. Many of the brothers were sons of the shvachas, the maidservants who Yaakov married as wives as well. But they were, you could say, they were in a lower rung. They weren't Yaakov's. They weren't a child of Yaakov's, of Rachel, Yaakov's main wife, rather from the other children. So, in what sense was Yosef inferior to his brothers? He was, on the contrary, superior to the brothers who are from the maidservants and older than his brother Binyamin. Answers the Gemara, itmar, hachi itmar. So rather, this statement should be said not about Yosef's brothers who bow down to Yosef, but rather, and we're going to skip around to the beginning of Parshas Vayechi now, talking about when Yaakov bowed down to Yosef. It says when Vayechi Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years, and he became old. He was 147 years old, and it drew the time of Yaakov to die, drew near. And he called to his son Yosef, and he made him swear to him that he should bring Yaakov to be buried only in Eretz Yisrael. And Yosef swore to him. And then it says, Vayishtachu Yisrael al Rosh Hamita. Yisrael, which is Yaakov, bowed down to Yosef while he's sitting at the head of the bed. So Yaakov, who obviously is superior to Yosef in many ways, because he's his father and because he's older for sure, and even then, Yaakov, the father, bowed down to his son, Yosef. The Maharsha says that Yaakov was bowing actually to the Shechina because the Shechina was always over his head. But at any rate, Yaakov bowed down to Yosef, so we see that this saying that when the fox is having a good hour, you should bow to it, is talking about Yaakov bowing to his son, Yosef.
But it sounds like it's a derogatory term to Yosef.
I'm saying a fox.
Yeah. And God gave him a talent to interpret dreams and
right,
sort of talk to him through the dreams and so forth.
Right. So perhaps in comparison to Yaakov, he would be considered to be on a lower level and rung down. But in comparison,
okay, I'm just curious. What is this? What is the statement in Perek about better to be something to the lion, the tail of fox?
Right. Better to be a zanov, a tail to a lion. And alti rosh l'shualim, the head of the fox.
Interesting. Okay.
I mean, I think the fox always is like talk like in the sense of a conniver. You know, somebody's always scheming and making different plans. That's more the idea of a fox. Mm-hmm. I think that's where the connotation. Because why a fox over every other animal? Like, what's wrong specifically with a fox? So I'm saying a person who puts himself in a position of importance, even though they're not really deserving to be there. Continues the Gemara. Vayinachem oisam. It says later on that Yosef comforted his brothers. His brothers came to Yosef and they told him, "We will be your servants." He told them, "Don't worry, I'm not out to get you. Do not fear. And I will provide for you and for your children." And he comforted them. Vayedaber al libam, and he spoke to their hearts. What does that mean? What is he adding on with these words? Vayedaber al libam, and he spoke to their hearts. He could have just said Vayinachem oisam, and he comforted them. What does it mean that he spoke to their hearts. Says the Gemara, Vaidaber alibam. Amar Rabbi Yamin bar Yefes, Amar Rabbi Elazar says, Rabbi Yamin, the son of Yefes, in the name of Rabbi Elazar. Melame, this teaches you, Sha'amar lahem dvarim shemiskablim al halev. He told them words that are acceptable to their heart, to alleviate the fear that they have. When a person's afraid, also in a physical sense, their heart's pounding a lot faster. And he told them words that calm them down. And he told them as a mashal, it's brought down in Rashi in the Torah. It says, Uma asara neiros, lo yochlu lechabes ner echad. If 10 candles cannot extinguish one candle, because candles make a lot of smoke. So if you have one candle standing together with 10 candles, that smoke from the 10 candles cannot put out the one candle, can extinguish the light. Yosef chose a metaphor of light because ner, candle, shows on the neshama of a person. And one light can't put out another light. It only increases the other ones. If you have 2 candles, put them together, the light becomes bigger. So Yosef's telling his brothers, you were not able to harm me. On the contrary, your actions caused me to rise to greatness and to become big, become the ruler of Mitzrayim. So if 10 candles can't put out one candle, meaning 10 brothers couldn't harm one brother, ner echad, so one candle, Yosef, one brother, ech yachol, how could he, with his smoke or with his actions, l'chabes asara neiros, how could he possibly extinguish 10 candles? So the nimshal is, he's telling his brothers that you are 10 people and you tried harming me altogether to kill me. And even though you were stronger and you were more than me and you were not successful, for sure, I'm one person going against 10. It's impossible for me to do anything to harm you at all. So therefore, I'm not able, you can see I'm not able to harm you. Now, many Achronim ask, like, what's the mashal over here? Like, he's giving him an example from candles. Candles in general don't have the nature of putting out other candles. This is a question by the Taz, the Turei Zahav, the famous Meferesh on halacha. So he explains that if you take, let's say, if you have a small candle and you under it, you make a big bonfire, so that flame will leave the candle and it will go out. So he says that the 10 tribes wanted to take away the kingship from Yosef, and they should become the king, and they weren't able to do it. And Hashem made Yosef became a king regardless. The Mishnayos Chassidim writes that a lot of times smoke could put out, a lot of smoke is almost like a wind, and it's able to choke to put out a flame. The brothers thought they could put out the flame. Or one's candle has no significance in front of a large candle. You go outside with a candle, while it's daytime, it doesn't have any significance. So the brothers thought that they will be so great, their stature will outshine Yosef. Still, they were not able to outshine Yosef. So Yosef's telling me, there's no way I could lower or weaken you at all. The last thing we're going to explain before going on to a little bit more of the Mizbeiach today, we're going to learn about the Mizbeiach. Right now in the Gemara, we're discussing the 5 garments. The Gemara itself doesn't go through the explaining these psukim, these verses, verse 15, which speaks about all the different garments of Mordechai. Mordechai went out with 5 different royal garments: crown, purple, blue, white. The Gemara doesn't explain it. Instead, we brought a lengthy explanation about the story of Yosef and his brothers. Now, in Shoshanas Yaakov, which after the Megillah is read, so a lot of singing Shoshanas Yaakov, Tzalav V'Samecha, a song for Yaakov who's happy. Beroisam Yachad Tcheles Mordechai. When they saw together the Tcheles, the blue of Mordechai. The pasuk, the verse over here says that he had many different. That Mordechai wore 5 different types of royal garments. And when we sing about it, we only say the Tcheles. Let Jacob be happy because they saw together Tcheles, the blue of Mordechai. Why would blue cause happiness more than any of the other colors or the other royal garments that he had? So we know that tzitzis actually is Tcheles. Tzitzis is blue. When the Jewish people saw that Mordechai is wearing all these beautiful royal garments, but in addition to that, he's also wearing the blue of its tzitzis. That caused them to have tremendous surprise. Mordechai was wearing a royal garment. He was wearing a royal crown, but Achashverosh had a nicer garment and a nicer crown. But when they saw that Mordechai is wearing his tzitzis, his blue tzitzis, on top of his garments, this was something unique. They're still in exile. Achashverosh is still the king. At this point, there's still no, the decree of Haman is still hanging over their heads until the next year, on Purim, until the next year, although Haman was already hung. And Mordechai is now second in command only to Achashverosh. So if he wants to get in Achashverosh's good side, let him hide his tzitzis. If Mordechai doesn't have what to worry about, and Mordechai could walk with his tzitzis out in the open, and he shouldn't be afraid, then there's no purpose then why is Achashverosh still have power over Mordechai? Well, what happened is that Mordechai was under the dominion of Achashverosh, and Mordechai was able to walk with his tzitzis in open. This was something the Jews couldn't understand. They saw a Jew, seems to be someone who follows the law, and he's working for the king very faithfully. And together with that, he's openly proud and happy to be Jewish. And he's wearing his tzitzis, not hiding it, but they could see it's revealed and open. And he's walking out in the open proudly. That's something the Jews cannot understand. And that is why there's such a great simcha, such a great happiness at this point. I was once in Germany, and I was a bacher on Merker Shlichus, going around visiting Jews in small cities. And one of the cities we went to was Leipzig. If you heard of Leipzig, it's famous that it used to have large fairs. People from all over Europe used to go to the fairs in Leipzig. Actually met someone over there. He's like, I have a son who lives in the US, a place you might have heard of. It's called Pittsburgh. So in Leipzig, walking down the streets in our hats and our jackets, and somebody comes over to us and he introduces himself with and he says, I'm Jewish, and I just want you guys to know that maybe you should not wear your hats and jackets out here in the street. You should wear a baseball cap. You should take your things, your tzitzis on the side, you should tuck them in, because over here in Leipzig, there's a lot of Muslims, and there's been many anti-Semitic incidents. So you should walk, you should try hiding the fact that you're Jewish. We spoke to him for a few minutes, but I told him, the Germans, we should be scared of being Jewish in Germany. Let them be scared of being Germans, let it be the other way around. Of course, we walk with our hand in jackets and our tzitzis on the outside. Baruch Hashem, nothing happened to us. Didn't even meet, nothing of that sort. There's a friend of mine, and he became from. He's actually a shliach now, and his brother. He tried getting him involved in Yiddishkeit, and he was, lukewarm. So his brother, he gave him gave him tefillin and everything. He gave his brother, and his brother went to a small town in California and was working as a cashier in a local grocery store. And he gave him his yarmulke, and he always kept in touch with him. And he told him, every Rosh Chodesh you should put on your yarmulke. Wear your yarmulke at work that day. So he decided to do it, to try it out just one time. And so his brother went to work that day in this grocery store in a small town somewhere in California. And that day, a girl comes over to him and tells him, "Oh, you're Jewish. I'm also Jewish." And they met and they started going out together. Because he wore his yarmulke, one day he got to meet a Jewish girl in a very small town, which is a very good thing. He wanted to meet a Jewish girl, but he didn't know how he will meet a Jewish girl in a small town. So you see from Mordechai that he had no shame to wear tzitzis, even out in public. And okay, we'll continue with over here. We're holding over here in the continuing explanation of the Megillah. We're almost done the Perek. We're almost done the explanation about the Megillah. It's only going to explain maybe another few verses, but we're going to explain tomorrow. We have less than one side of a page left. We're going to explain the interesting minhag that we have. What? Wednesday. Wednesday. Yeah, we can have a share Wednesday. Why not? Yeah, but it's before Chatzos. It's before midday. Right? Wednesday we can have a class. Maybe we should bring a Suda. I don't know. Thursday there won't be a share. Maybe Friday, because Friday Rabbi Darren's not here and I'm not here. And a lot of us are going into New York, to the oil for Shabbos. It's perhaps not Friday either. And so it'll be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday this week. But we're going to discuss the minhag, the custom that we have when we read the 10 sons of Haman in the Megillah, we read it all in one breath. So we're going to go through that interesting minhag, interesting custom. We're going to continue now in Mesechta Middos, which discusses Mishnayos, which has the layout, the architecture of the Beis Hamikdash, and we're going to learn today about the Mizbeiach. This is Perek Shlishi, chapter 3, and the vast majority of chapter 3 talks about the Mizbeiach, the main part of the Beis Hamikdash, not the most holy part, but the main part of the Beis Hamikdash, which is the altar where all the korbanos, all the sacrifices of animals were brought, the Mizbeiach. So the Mizbeiach, it was quite a large area. Maybe I'll do some of the Mishnah outside. But the Mizbeiach was made out of three large squares, one on top of the other. The one all the way on the bottom was called Yesod, which means foundation, the bottom layer. On top of that, and that was only one amma, about 2 feet tall. On top of it, then afterwards, went in an amma. So that's the base of the Mizbeiach. There was a second square smaller than the first square, and this was called the Soivev. The Soivev was a large square, it's about 5 ammas tall, which is about 10 feet tall. And it was 30 ammas by 30 ammas, 60 feet by 60 feet, and 10 feet tall. And that's the whole middle portion of the Mizbeiach over here. The lower portion was 32 ammas, 64 feet by 64 feet. That's the bottom square, which was only 2 feet tall. Right, so it's 2 feet. Then again, another 10 feet. So far, it's 12 feet tall, 6 ammas tall. And then you had a third square on top of that, which was smaller than the 2 bottom squares, but also 1 amma, 2 feet less wide. And that is called the Gag, the roof of the Mizbeiach. And so it went in 2 feet more narrow than the bottom square of the Mizbeiach. So you have 3 squares, one on top of the other. The base, the first square, which is called the Soivev, the second one called the Gag. On top of the Mizbeiach, you had what's called kronos, horns, which were 4 protrusions coming up from the 4 sides of the Mizbeiach. These things over here, protrusions on the 4 sides, each one was 1 amma by 1 amma, which is about 2 feet by 2 feet. So of course you couldn't walk between those areas without climbing on it and going off of it. The karnes hamizbeach, the horns of the mizbeach, had special. The main task was to be there to add beauty, and also part of the Mizbeiach, every time we brought a korban, a sacrifice, especially an egel, a calf, was to atone for the chet egel, the sin of the golden calf. And part of the sin of the golden calf was a calf which had horns, an egel. So the Mizbeiach also had to have horns to atone for the golden calf. So that area was an amma by an amma, each one of these 4 corners. And they were hollow. They weren't full, although a cover was made on them in order that things shouldn't fall inside. And that was called the karnes hamizbeach, the horns of the mizbeach. And they were an amma tall, an amma wide, and an amma long. Then you had what's called the makom raglei hiluch hakoyanim. You could zoom in a little bit over here. I'll try zooming in.
Well, we don't see a picture, so.
Oh, you don't see any of these pictures. I'm sorry. I thought they could see it here. I'm very, very sorry. Let me do a new share, and now you should see it.
Yep.
So this is in general the area of the Mizbeiach. He had all the different levels of the Mizbeiach. And from the bird's eye view, you see like a walkway on top of the Mizbeiach going on an inside track and touching all 4 corners, all 4 horns, all 4 corners of the Mizbeiach. That track is called Makom Hiluch Ragle Kohanim, the place where the Kohanim would walk. There would be a walkway. A Kohen, out of respect for the Beis HaMikdash and Mizbeiach, he would not walk down the same way he came up. He would walk around the whole thing, and also he would make always a right when he would go up to the Mizbeiach, except for some exceptions, he would make a left. So he would not go down the same way he would go up, and so they would walk around the entire top of the Mizbeiach. That's called the Makom Ragal Hiluch HaKohanim. So the top of the Mizbeiach, the top layer of the Mizbeiach, the Gag was 28 amas by 28 amas. From there, the place of the horns took up 4. You could say that 4 horns on each side. Each side is an amma. So then you have a walkway. Inside of the horns is 26 amas by 26 amas, because you have on both sides a horn taking up a amma on each side. So this walkway was 26 amas long by 26 amas long, so about 50 feet long by 50 feet long, and that was a square where the Kohanim would walk around. And in general, they would walk over there unless they had to be in the middle for one of the tasks, which was either adding wood to one of the 3 or 4 bonfires that were on the Mizbeiach, or to put some of the korbanos, the sacrifices, on the Mizbeiach, or to sprinkle. Sometimes they would have to sprinkle blood on some of the horns of the Mizbeiach. So that is the walkway of the Kohanim. So inside of this 250 square foot area, that itself was further subdivided into different areas. Was the walkway was 1 amma, 2 feet wide. 2 feet, 1 amma. Yeah. Yeah. Kohanim, they have to be careful, and we'll see. A lot of times they'll be walking around the soivev. They walk around the lower portion on the walkway. There's no guardrail on the side of the Mizbeiach. And had to walk around over here while holding with 2 hands, 1 hand holding the blood, other hand sprinkling it. You have to be very careful. And on the ramp, which we'll get to soon, there was no guardrail either. It was steep. It went up 10 amas or 9 amas, went up 18 feet over the course of 64 feet long. So I'm not sure the grade exactly, but it was very slippery because it was covered with stones, it was slippery. And they used to put salt over the ramp in order the Kohanim should not slip. As a matter of fact, they used to when the first service of the day is called removing some of the ashes, the first shovel of ashes from the Mizbeiach, Haramas Hadeshen, and that was very it was one of the most special services in the Beis HaMikdash. If I remember correctly, any Kohen who received that one would become very wealthy, and there was always a competition. Every Kohen wanted to do it, and the way they would decide which Kohen should receive that job was it would be a race. Which Kohen could run up to the top of the Mizbeiach first? So different Kohanim would run up to the top of the Mizbeiach. Whoever got to the top first, they would receive that task. One time, a Kohen saw he was going to be second. Someone else would get there first. He shoved the other Kohen, and the other Kohen fell, and he broke his leg. Because of that, they said, we're stopping the system, and instead they made it was called a lottery, every single day. So yes, you have to be very sure-footed in order to walk up the Mizbeiach. So that is on top. So that is the layout of the Mizbeiach. You had different bonfires. Yes.
The black in the center there, is that the ashes?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll go through the different bonfires that were on the Mizbeiach. You had the big one called the Maracha Gedola, the very big bonfire. That's where they burnt all the korbanos. And then there was that's Maracha Gedola, and that's this big bonfire over here. Yeah, this big, huge bonfire, the biggest one. Then you had a secondary bonfire. There's different opinions in the Mishnah how many fires are on the Mizbeiach. There's a secondary bonfire, which was used only for one thing. The Kohen who would burn the Tiferes that day, and there was a secondary Mizbeiach altar, a short one, where they would burn the incense inside of the Kodesh, right? The secondary Mizbeiach Hazav, the golden Mizbeiach. They would take coals from the secondary bonfire on top of the Mizbeiach. Right, so this is already inside the tabernacle, and that's a menorah. There's a golden Mizbeiach. That's a shulchan, table with a showbread, and here is the Mizbeiach. You can see a replica of it in the Temple Institute Museum. So in this Mizbeiach, they would burn Tiferes incense every single day. Either the Kohen Gadol could do it if he wanted, or a regular Kohen could do it as well. And it was a very big schus as well. So from the secondary bonfire, the smaller one, they would take the coals that will be used on the Mizbeiach Hazav, on the golden Mizbeiach. That's a secondary bonfire on top of the Mizbeiach. There was a third bonfire you see over here. A third bonfire, even smaller than the second one. That one was closer to the entrance of the Heichal, of the tabernacle. That one was used only to fulfill the mitzvah of there should be a constant fire on the Mizbeiach. Eish tamet tukar al Mizbeiach le'sichpeh, and there be a constant fire. It says in Hayom Yom that a person's neshama is a constant fire burning. Always we have to light it. And every day they would add wood, at least 2 pieces of wood to that fire in order to keep it going. And it says in the first Beis HaMikdash, a fire was miraculous and it never went out, even if you didn't add wood. But they would add 2 pieces every day to fulfill the mitzvah of making sure that there is a constant fire on the Mizbeiach. That is the third bonfire. On Yom Kippur, they would add a 4th bonfire as well, about the same size as the third one. And they would use that when the Kohen Gadol would go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. So then he would take coals from that 4th bonfire and bring it into the Holy of Holies. And he would take it in a shovel, and he would burn Tiferes, the incense, in the Holy of Holies, which was one of the holiest tasks in the Beis HaMikdash that could ever be. That took place. So you see, here is a Aron, the ark, with a luchos inside. In the second Beis HaMikdash, there was only the stone without the Aron, without the ark and the luchos. And the Kohen Gadol took a shovel of coals. It came from the 4th bonfire on the outer Mizbeiach, and he would burn the Tiferes on there. In the middle of the Mizbeiach, it was called the Tapuach. Sorry. It means it's 12 o'clock. In this room, they give you a alarm. I'll finish it up quickly. Here's the Mizbeiach. There was a very large, it's called an apple, which is like a dome. They would take ashes from the korbanos, and after they were done, they would pile it up in the middle of the Mizbeiach. They wouldn't take it out right away. They would pile up in the middle of the Mizbeiach, and it would add beauty to the Mizbeiach to say, look, how many korbanos, how many sacrifices were brought on the Mizbeiach every single day. And they would, of course, clean the top of the Mizbeiach, but they would gather it all together, and on the tapuach would be the ashes of the Mizbeiach. Every morning, there would be a mitzvah. One Kohen would take 1 shovel of ashes and pour it on the side of the Mizbeiach, and miraculously, it always either was absorbed in the ground. In second Beis HaMikdash, later on, where you didn't have a miracle of it being absorbed in the ground, they would take it to outside of the Beis HaMikdash. And then after that, all the Kohanim would come with shovels and buckets, and they would empty out this entire tapuach, the pile of ashes, and bring it outside of the Beis HaMikdash. Was called a special place where they would put all the ashes, and then it would go along in water to the Nachal Kidron, to a valley of Kidron. Today in Nachal Kidron, they made a lot of excavations, and there's many fragments of animals that were burned from Mizbeiach, korbanos. Many the fragments of animals are inside of the ash that they found in Nachal Kidron. A lot of it would be swept in the river, and there would be different farmers paying the Beis HaMikdash money to use the water from the Nachal Kidron, because it would be very good for fertilizing their fields, because it had a lot of animal parts in it. When it came to Yom Tov, the holidays, they would not clean the tapuach. They would not empty it out every day. They would let it build up and become very large as a beauty for the Mizbeiach. There was a kevesh, a ramp. It's already 12:02. We started 12:07, so I'll go for five more minutes. There was a kevesh, a very long ramp, 32 amos long, 64 feet long, and it went up a height of 9 amos, about 18 feet. And this was how they would go up and down the Mizbeiach. You were not allowed to walk with steps because it would make the Kohanim's sinus go too high. There were many steps in the Beis HaMikdash. With the Mizbeiach, you're not allowed to walk with steps. There was, on top of this corner over here, there were 2 holes called shisin. Shisin had pipes built into the Mizbeiach, which they would pour down wine for korbanos down over here, and on Sukkot they would pour down the water that was drawn from the Simchas Beis HaShoeva. They would pour it down over there as well. Here on the side of the ramp would not touch the Mizbeiach. There's actually a small entrance, a small gap in between, it says like a hair breadth, but a very small gap between the ramp and the Mizbeiach. The reason is because there's a mitzvah to throw the zarak oisai. Certain karbanas had to be thrown on the Mizbeiach. You look at this. This was before the era of baseball and practicing your pitches. They had to throw. The Kohen, you see, has to throw chatas oif, a certain type of karban of a bird, throw it onto the marach gedola, onto the large bonfire. It means you have to be off the, not on the altar, off the Mizbeiach, and throw it on. So therefore, the ramp had to be detached from the Mizbeiach. So you see the Kohen over here, winding up to throw the karban, throwing it onto the large bonfire. You had what's called a revuva. Revuva means a window, a ledge. And this revuva, there was a window in the Mizbeiach. Psulei chatas ha'oif. The bird offerings, which became disqualified, you were not allowed to, you couldn't burn it on the Mizbeiach, but they had to stay in the Beis HaMikdash until the night was over, until it became dark. Because once it became holy, it cannot be taken outside of the Beis HaMikdash. So they would put any disqualified bird offerings that were already shechted, they would put it into the revuva, into this window on the side of the Mizbeiach, and it would stay there until the night, and then they would take it outside where it would be burned.
Was the revuva part of the ramp?
Yeah, there's two opinions, yeah, but most opinions agree that the revuva was part of the ramp, yes. It was like a window in the ramp.
Okay. Next question is, in the Mishkan, there was a copper altar, which I assume would be the similar to this altar, correct?
Right, correct.
So so was it was hidden away, and then the stone altar was made instead. Is that
the one, the stone altar in the Mishkan or in the Beis HaMikdash?
Yes, in the well, that's my. Wasn't the stone altar covered?
So
it was an altar of dirt, but
right. So in the Mishkan, the actual Mizbeiach, the altar, was wood covered in copper, and it was 3 amos tall. And they would build a base every time they camped of 7 amos of earth underneath it. So they actually have a. I'm saying where they, but that's the other parts of the Mizbeiach. There is somewhere over here a part of the tabernacle, the Mishkan. The tabernacle, the karban. So over here there is. This is what the, at least according to one of the opinions, what the Mizbeiach looked like in the desert. Over here. So it was only 3 amos tall, which is about 6 feet tall. And they had a revuva net around it. And this is how the artist envisioned it. And it was wood covered in copper. And every time they camped, they would make a base out of it, out of sand, whatever they found in the ground. So the ramp was also made out of stones or whatever else they found over there. It wasn't carried. The ramp base was not carried around with them. They had to rebuild it from new every single time. And although it was stone, but they would fill it up with sand in order to cover it, to cover the area. So that's what in the Mishkan and tabernacle, it was like this. In the Beis HaMikdash, it was a lot different. They sort of built a mold, the entire area of the Mizbeiach. They built a mold, and then they filled that with stone as much as they could, and then they sort of mixed it together with water in order to make it solid. So the fact that the Mizbeiach was able to be dismantled was a very big thing, because it was such a large, solid structure. So here you see certain parts of the karbanos ready to be brought up to the Mizbeiach. Here's the window, the revuva inside of the side of the Mishkan. Over here, there was the shisin. There was like a tunnel. You're able to there were pipes going under the Mizbeiach, and there was a tunnel where you're able to sort of crawl in, unclog the pipes if they became clogged. Over here. Here's just a bird's eye view of the Mizbeiach. Every once in a while, they would send somebody down to unclog all the blood or things that became congealed. These were the ancient plumbing before they had snakes and before they had Mr. Rotor. You had on the Mizbeiach, on the Soiviv, the second square of the Mizbeiach was amma wider on every side, and in the third square of the Mizbeiach, so there was a walkway where the Kohanim could walk around. And when they would sprinkle blood, they would, many different of the Karbanas, they would walk up that ramp. There was a ramp going up on the side of the Mizbeach, and they would walk around the entire, all four corners. Most Karbanas, they would walk up on this side. Some, they would walk up on the other side. And they would walk around the entire Mizbeach to sprinkle the blood. There's different ways of sprinkling the blood, depending on the Karban. Some would put their finger on the Mizbeach. Some would flick their finger. And this is a drawing of a shiner of Sukkos. They would take large shinas, large aravas. If you ever seen a aravas tree, the trees of aravas are very, very tall when they're wild. We just get the top part of it, and they would take one's 20 feet tall, and they would line it up with the mizbeach that the tops should be going over the mizbeach. There was a chut hasikra, a red line on the Mizbeiach, about halfway up, and 5 amas tall, and that would separate the Mizbeiach from the top half to the bottom half. Some karbanas had to be, the blood had to sprinkle on the top half of the Mizbeiach. Some karbanas, the blood had to be sprinkled on the bottom half of the Mizbeiach. So the chut hasikra, a red line going around the Mizbeiach, 1 amma lower than the top of the middle portion. So that chut hasikra, that red line, was the part which was separate for the karbanas, for the kohanim. This red line, what is the higher half of the mizbeach? What is the lower half of the mizbeach? The last thing we'll discuss over here is we discussed how they built it as a mold and filled up with stone. And the last thing we'll discuss is the yesod, the foundation of the Mizbeiach, the lower, the part of the Mizbeiach, which is 32 amas by 32 amas, was actually, this base was only built on 2 sides. It didn't protrude, on 2 of the sides, it didn't protrude. And we've mentioned this before, that Yehuda, the portion of Binyamin wanted the Beis HaMikdash to be built in their portion. Yehuda wanted the Beis HaMikdash to be built in their portion. So the yesod, the foundation of the Mizbeiach, was built on 2 sides, just in the portion of Binyamin. And this was where the break between the land of the area of the tribe of Binyamin and the tribe of Yehuda took place along the Mizbeiach. And the yesod, the foundation, was only on 2 sides, a side closer to the Beis HaMikdash, and along the side where the this side where the Kohanim, and a side in the back. It would protrude 1 amma on every single side. In addition to that, and at the end of the yesod, you had 2 holes where also they would pour down different parts where they would drain the libations that they would bring with the Mizbeach. So next time we're going to go, Mir Hashem, describe the other part over here called the Beis HaMitbechayim. The Beis HaMitbechayim, the place, it's called the butcher house, where they would process the karbanas. And there are many different components over there, including the Lishkas HaGazis, where the Sanhedrin will be sitting right on top of on a second floor in a big gazebo, sort of overlooking the karbanas, and they would have the best possible view you could get of the Heichel. Okay, thank you. Thank you for joining.